So remember, Stu, when I talked to you about 4 weeks ago about PEADs? And neither of us had ever heard of it.
And what's it, PEADs?
It was Presidential Emergency Action Directives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And we had not even heard of it at the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The New York Times reports today, until now, public knowledge of what the government put into classified presidential directives, which invoke emergency and wartime powers granted by Congress and otherwise claimed by presidents, have been limited to declassified descriptions of those developed in the early Cold War. In that era, they included steps like imposing martial law, rounding up people deemed dangerous, and censoring news from abroad. What could possibly go wrong? Now, this was first started by Eisenhower in the atomic age, when we were afraid of nuclear weapons. If we would go to a nuclear war, there wouldn't be enough time for them to sit around, the cabinet and go, okay, so what do we do? They pushed a button and everything had to go. So they would make these directives beforehand, and they would say, this is for an emergency in case of a nuclear war. And the president would sign it, and then it would be held. So Congress doesn't have a right to look at these things because they're not actually enforced. It's kind of like our advice until the emergency happens, and then it becomes the law of the land.
How does it become the law of the land? What process gives the president the right to...
Emergency orders. If there's an emergency, the president has all kinds of powers. Now, I can't think of an emergency that might be on the horizon. Sure, there's the economic emergency that could happen. There's the energy shortage that might happen. There's a lawlessness emergency on the streets that could happen. But other than that, can you think of anything?
No.
There's the monkeypox emergency. I left that one out. There's the cheating at an election one that, would be really. There's the war emergency action that could be declared. But other than that, again, nothing to see here. So it's not been clear what the modern directives have been. Known presidential emergency action documents, those are called PEADs. They've never been made public or shown to Congress, but the New York Times has been looking into George W. Bush. Now, why would you stop there? I think we all know why. Am I right? Several of the files provided to the New York Times by the Brennan Center for Justice shows that the Bush-era effort partly focused on a law that permits the president to take over or shut down communications networks in wartime. Remember that one? And people like your local radio hosts and your hosts on talk radio said, hey, for the first time in my career, the emergency broadcast system is being taken out of our hands. What the emergency broadcast system used to be is the White House would alert the radio stations. And I think it was WMAL in Washington would get the first alert. And then WMAL would hear the tones and they would say, this is a test or this is an emergency. If it was an emergency, they'd pass it on to another station, and that station would pass it on. Now, it would take like an hour to get all the way across the country to the West. So the West had already been wiped out, okay? But it's Seattle. Who cares? Anyway, so
that was their opinion at the time.
It was their, yeah. I remember, because I worked in Seattle, and I remember doing those tests going, if it's real, we're all dead anyway. So, hey, everybody in Seattle, you've got about 90 seconds to prepare. So that's the way the test used to work. Then back in the George Bush era, they changed it. He now can push a button in the Oval Office or wherever, and it immediately overrides all signals. So he's on television and every radio station. There is no other information that is coming out except from the information from the White House.
Didn't this happen in Austin Powers? Wasn't that his plan where he could just press a button and would overtake all broadcast?
Probably.
Okay.
Probably.
Just want to make sure.
I didn't see it, but yeah, we're probably taking directives from Austin Powers. And that's probably the thing that will
Dr.
make
Evil,
the
actually.
most sense all day to you. Apparently, lawmakers cannot interfere with these. Another file from the summer of 2008 mentioned that the Justice Department lawyers were revising an unidentified draft order in light of recent Supreme Court opinions. The memo doesn't specify the ruling, but the court had just issued the landmark decision on topics that relate to government actions in an emergency, one about gun rights in the United States, and another about the rights of Guantanamo detainees in court hearings. Well, that could be any one of those or all of those. Now, here's the thing. We got these through FOIA, but we didn't FOIA the government. We FOIA'd the George W. Bush Library. Now, no one knows why they didn't FOIA the Obama administration's records, other than he doesn't have a library and nobody's building one yet. Because graft? I mean, they're looking for the right place. So we don't know what happened with the PEADs. They are still enforceable if the president would say, hey, nuclear launch, what do you have? And it's the Eisenhower one. He could still have that. We don't know what's in effect and what's not in effect. Many of them are classified. In fact, all of them are classified except for this group that has just been released. Apparently, they had, I'm looking for it here, I think 9,000 pages were not released because they're still classified. And I think they released 2,000 pages. So there's another 9, but I'm sure there's almost nothing on those other 9 that remain.
Probably everything's fine.
Yeah.
It's the best way to always assume. We've learned that lately. Just assume everything's going to be fine.
Isn't that frightening?
Yeah.
It's truly frightening.